world is anxiously watching the possibility of peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. But are leaders genuinely interested in ending the war, or merely posturing for the cameras? And this is where things get complicated. The Kremlin is downplaying claims of a groundbreaking summit between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, even as former U.S. President Donald Trump publicly urges both sides to sit down and negotiate an end to the conflict in Ukraine. This fresh appeal for dialogue follows a whirlwind of diplomatic activities, including a noteworthy meeting between the U.S. President and Putin in Alaska last week, and the gathering of 7 European heads of state alongside Zelensky at the White House this Monday. Trump openly admitted that the situation is extremely complex. He described it as a tough one, and acknowledged that Putin may have no real intention of seeking a peaceful resolution. "We're about to learn a lot about President Putin in the coming weeks," Trump stated on Tuesday, adding, "It's entirely possible he has no interest in making a deal." But he offered no insight as to what might change if Putin refuses to come to the table. Initially, Trump was pushing for a 3-way summit involving himself, Putin, and Zelensky. Now, however, he's hinting it might be more productive if just the Russian and Ukrainian leaders met on their own first, reserving the option for him to join if it becomes necessary. He noted he'd see what happens before committing to his participation. Putin, for his part, told Trump this Monday that he is open to the concept of direct talks with Ukraine. Yet the very next day, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov appeared to soften and blur that offer, insisting that any summit would need gradual preparation, starting with discussions among experts and progressing through all necessary stages. This rather vague stance is emblematic of Russia's tendency to offer hopeful signals that quickly become diluted with bureaucratic hesitancy. Similarly, Dmitry Polyansky, Russia's deputy representative to the United Nations, informed the BBC that no one has refused the possibility of direct talks, but underlined that it shouldn't be a meeting for the sake of a meeting. Meanwhile, NATO military leaders are expected to hold an online discussion this Wednesday, and Britain's top military official, Admiral Tony Radakin, is heading to Washington to confer on the possibility of deploying a reassurance force to Ukraine if hostilities pause. There are reports that Putin even suggested Zelensky travel to Moscow for negotiations, a highly unlikely proposition Ukraine would ever accept. Was this a diplomatic trap, or simply a way for Moscow to make Kyiv look unwilling? All the negotiations of recent days seem to have given Trump deeper insight into the tangled web of differences between Moscow's expectations and Ukraine's demands. At one point, Trump boasted he could secure a ceasefire from Putin, but that promise hasn't been realized. Now he argues instead that the focus should shift to a lasting peace settlement. One area where progress was made: security guarantees for Ukraine, which Zelensky and European allies have convinced Trump are crucial for Kyiv's future autonomy if peace ever emerges. On Tuesday, Trump said the United States would be willing to provide aerial support to European countries prepared to send ground troops into Ukraine to enforce a ceasefire or peace deal, while explicitly ruling out U.S. boots on the ground. Yet he left the details, whether this would mean supplying intelligence, fighter jets, or actual airstrikes, deliberately hazy. And this is the part most people miss. While Trump's proposals remain ambiguous, the so-called coalition of the willing, led by France and the UK, claims it's pushing forward with plans for a reassurance force to bolster Ukraine's security if the violence ends. Following a virtual meeting of this group on Tuesday, a British government spokesperson confirmed that future discussions with the U.S. will explore more robust security arrangements. After Trump's meetings with both Putin and Zelensky, he now seems to believe that direct, leader-to-leader talks might finally inch the conflict closer to peace, though he did note the tremendous bad blood that's accumulated between them over the years. Indeed, The last direct encounter between Putin and Zelensky was all the way back in 2019, and since then, Russia's full-scale invasion has led to tens of thousands of deaths, immeasurable destruction, and relentless attacks on civilian targets across Ukraine. A controversial layer here, Putin regards Zelensky as an illegitimate president, holding him responsible for Ukraine's ever-closer alignment with the West. For years, Putin has promoted the unfounded narrative that Ukraine is governed by a neo-Nazi regime, and asserts that any peaceful solution would require toppling the current Kyiv government. Russian state media frequently ridicule Zelensky, calling him a clown. With Russia's military currently enjoying advantages on the battlefield, there is little pressure on the Kremlin to earnestly pursue talks now. Despite all this, European leaders as well as Zelensky continue to express openness to the idea of a direct summit. Earlier this week, Zelensky said he would consider any format for meeting with Putin, and European officials began vetting potential venues. France's President Emmanuel Macron has suggested Geneva, Switzerland, while Budapest has been proposed by Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. But here's where it gets controversial. Orbán maintains unusually friendly ties with Moscow, and recently argued that Russia has already won the war, making it doubtful that Kyiv would view Budapest as a truly neutral site for negotiations. Clearly, European leaders hope their support for talks will prod Trump into taking a harder line if Putin proves intransigent. Even so, Europe's optimism is far more muted than Trump's. On Tuesday, Macron referred to Putin as a predator, an ogre at our doorstep, and voiced serious doubts about the Russian president's sincerity when it comes to peace. Similarly, Finland's President Alexander Stubb cautioned that Putin rarely can be trusted, expressing skepticism that a Zelensky-Putin meeting will ever materialize. More high-stakes meetings among world leaders are already on the calendar for the days ahead, as the global community waits to see just how strongly Trump will support his European allies. So here's a question for you. Do you believe these diplomatic overtures are genuine efforts at peace, or just political theater? Should Ukraine trust in direct talks with Moscow, or is Europe right to remain wary? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, whether you agree, disagree, or see things in a totally different way.